channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing a fancy booktube hat, and this is my anticipated fantasy and science fiction book releases for the second half of 2024. This list is going to be on the long side. I kept procrastinating making this video with the excuse that, oh, I'm still doing my research, and then I kept finding more books to add to it. As always, publication dates are subject to change at any time, and I make no promises that I will ever read or review any of these books. These are books that are interesting to me for whatever reason, but it is a resource for you. Starting off on July 2nd from Orbit, we have The Undermining of Twyla and Frank by Megan Bannen. This is a second fantasy romance novel. I think it's set in the same world as The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, which I do have but haven't yet read. I don't know if you need to read them in order, but these seem like fun, quirky, small town romances set in a fantasy world with zombies in the case of the first book and dragons in the case of the second book. Another cozy fantasy romance is The Spellshop by Beth Durst. This is coming out on July 9th from Bramble. Beth Durst is a relatively prolific author of both adult and YA fantasy. This is adult. I read her Queens of Renthia trilogy a number of years ago and thought they were really solid, like not groundbreaking fantasy in any way, but just really good, escapist, enjoyable reads. I think she could probably pull off this type of cottagecore romantasy really well. This one apparently has a sentient spider plant in it. On July 16th from Tachyon Publications, we have Yoke of Stars by R.B. Lemberg. This is either a short novel or a novella in their Birdverse universe. Tachyon previously published The Four Profound Weaves, which I've had on my shelves for a long time now and really still want to read, and also The Unbalancing, which those books both look like very much my sort of thing. These are supposedly lyrical, queer fantasy books, and this one is supposedly about an apprentice assassin and a linguist exchanging stories. Also on July 16th, this time from Tor.com, we have The West Passage by Jared Pechaček. This is supposedly a very weird medieval fantasy. Like, most of the time when we think of medieval fantasy, there's like a very strict set of things we associate with that, and this does not appear to be that at all. The book description is very what the heck. I don't know what to expect from this, but I am intrigued. On July 30th, also from Tor.com, we have Navigational Entanglements by Aliette de Bodard. This is, I think, one of two novellas that Aliette de Bodard has coming out in the second half of this year. This is science fiction, maybe science fantasy, with some martial arts components. It does look like it's Vietnamese inspired, but it is not in the Juye universe. On August 6th, from Tor Books, is Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. This is a dark Goose Girl retelling, possibly leaning into horror. This is the first book on this list that I've pre-ordered. I will definitely be reading this, even if it turns out to be super spooky. Also on August 6th from Tor.com is The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djèlí Clark. This one appears to have been pushed back. It previously appeared on my list for the first half of the year. It's now set for August 6th. Based on the page count, I'm not sure if this is a long novella or a short novel, and as the title suggests, it's about undead assassins. Next, on August 13th from Orbit is The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. MacLean. This is a sapphic romantasy about a zoo for mythical creatures. Nalo Hopkinson is a very highly regarded author. I've always thought I should read something from, but I've never really known what book of hers I might want to read. I don't think she's released anything new in quite some time, but she has two books on this list, a novel and a story collection, and both look like they might be contenders for the first Nalo Hopkinson book I should pick up. The first one is Blackheart Man. This is the novel. This is coming on August 20th from Saga Press. This is about a scholar from an island nation who finds himself at the center of a complicated political and magical situation. Also on August 20th from Daw, we have She Who Knows by Nnedi Okorafor. This is the first in a new novella trilogy that I believe is a prequel to Who Fears Death, which I haven't read. But because it's a prequel, I'm assuming you don't have to. Next on this list list is my second pre-order, Long Live Evil by Rees Brennan. Now this was originally scheduled for July, but it has been pushed back to August 27th in the US. It's published by Orbit. I don't know what the status on the UK publication is and if that's still in July or if it's also been pushed back, but like I got the email on my pre-order that the publication date in the US has been moved. So August 27th is the date I'm going with. This is Rees Brennan's adult debut. It is an isekai-inspired fantasy novel about a woman who gets another chance at life as a villain character from her favorite fantasy series. And knowing what I know about Rees Brennan as an author, I am guessing that this will be absolutely hilarious, but also have more depth than first meets the eye. I believe this is supposed to be the first in a series, but I don't know how many books there are going to be. Next is a sequel on August 27th from Del Rey. We are getting Confounding Oaths by Alexis Hall, which is the second fantasy romance book in the series that started with Mortal Follies. These are Regency historical queer fantasy romance with an interesting narrative device. I had mixed feelings about the first book, but I am intrigued enough that I would consider getting this one from the library. I don't think I'm going to buy it. This one follows one of the side characters from book one. Next is the first of, I think, only 2 YA books that made it onto this list for me, and that is This Fatal Kiss by Alicia Jasinska, which is scheduled for September 10th from Peachtree Teen. I'm not going to lie, this is on the list almost purely because of the book cover. Like, that's gorgeous. The protagonist in this is a water nymph who needs someone to like break her curse so she can become human again, and it's supposedly a polyamorous romance. Next, on September 17th from Del Rey is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft. Allison Saft is an author I've been curious about. Her previous books that I'm aware of have been YA, but this is an adult title. This looks like it's set in a secondary fantasy world. It's a sapphic romance about a folklorist who has to team up with her academic rival. And it also has a gorgeous cover. Like, this one and the one that came before it are my cover art winners for the video. Another book that's been featured in my anticipated releases videos before, but has been pushed back multiple times at this point is Space Oddity by Catherine M. Valenti, which is the sequel to Space Opera. Right now it's scheduled for September 24th from Saga Press, and I actually kind of believe it this time because I think there are arcs out in the world. The second YA title on this list is also a September 24th release. This is The 13th Child by Erin A. Craig, which is published by Delacorte Press. This is the author of House of Salt and Sorrows, which was a gothic 12 Dancing Princesses retelling duology. I was intrigued by what I heard about those books. I know they're kind of spooky, and this one definitely is too. It is also a fairy tale retelling. This is a retelling of Godfather Death, which is a somewhat lesser known Brothers Grimm tale. Next is the second Aliette de Bodard novella that I mentioned earlier. That's In the Shadow of the Ship from Subterranean Press. On their website, they are listing this just as September 2024 for the release date. I know they are not necessarily good at delivering books on an exact predicted release day, so this might be later than September, but it seems likely this will happen by the end of the year. This one is another Shuya Universe novella, and I've really liked the previous 2 of these that were published by Subterranean Press. Those were The Tea Master and the Detective and Seven of Infinities. Starting in on October releases with The City in Glass by Nevo. This is coming on October 1st from Tor.com. This looks like a whole new standalone thing about demons and angels and a fallen city. It's a fictional city, but I don't know if it's supposed to be in the real world or not. Next on this list is the token book that I don't actually believe will be released on the currently scheduled publication date. But I live in hope, and so I put it on the list as an act of optimism. And this is Villain, the sequel to Hench by Natalie Zena Walshotz. from William Morrow. The publisher's website says that this is coming out on October 1st, and the reasons I don't really believe it are, one, there's been no cover reveal yet, and two, I don't think the author has publicly stated that that's the publication date, although she has confirmed that the book is happening. The reason I live in hope is that this did recently get a title change and a new book description. When this was announced, it was originally called Right Hand. I think the Goodreads listing still lists it as Right Hand. But we have a whole book description right now and everything, so like maybe this will happen on October 1st. These are supervillain books, in case you weren't aware. Next, on October 8th from Bramble is Sword Crossed by Freya Marsk, a queer fantasy romance advertised as cozy and low stakes but with swords. And I'm gonna pick a fight with the marketing and book description of this book, because I know this is a fantasy book because they have it listed as such on the publisher website, and you can infer that it's a fantasy book because that's what Freya Marsk has written previously, and it's got fantasy books listed as comp titles, but the book description does not specify at all if this is historical or set in a fantasy world, and there's no reference to magic. And so because Bramble is not an SFF only imprint, it's impossible to confirm from the book description alone that this is fantasy in any way. And as a genre SFF reader and like a genre SFF YouTube channel, it frustrates me when I have to do this much digging just to confirm that a book is fantasy. That said, if this is set in a secondary fantasy world as opposed to being historical, I would be really interested to see how Freya Marsk does that. Next, on October 8th, is The Mountain Crown by Karen Loachi. This is a novella from Solaris, and I have enjoyed some of their recent novella releases. This is supposed to be the first book in a novella trilogy called The Crowns of Ischia. And as you can tell from the cover, this is a dragon book. Also on October 8th is a book with a startlingly similar looking cover. That is Blood of the Old Kings by Sung-il Kim, translated from Korean by Anton Her. This is from Tor Books in the US, but I think it's Orbit in the UK. And honestly, it looks like a much more standard issue epic fantasy than would normally pique my interest. But SFF in translation from like a major SFF publisher is so rare that I thought it was important to include it. I cannot find anywhere when this was originally published in Korean, but I think it is the first book in a trilogy. On October 22nd from Red Hook, we have The Scholar and the Last Fairy Door by H.G. Perry. And honestly, this cover design is such a disappointment after The Magician's Daughter, which was her previous book from the same publisher, which had a gorgeous cover. But anyways, I did really like The Magician's Daughter, so I'm intrigued by this one. This is a historical fantasy set in 1921, and it looks like there's some alternate history going on where like fairy magic was involved in World War I. Next, on October 22nd, is a book that's really just a short story, but I think is still absolutely worth mentioning. That's The Wood at Midwinter by Susanna Clark. I don't think this is even strictly speaking a brand new short story. I think this was originally produced on audio for BBC Radio a few years ago. But this is going to be a print edition from Bloomsbury that's going to be illustrated, though I don't know who the illustrator is. It looks like a wintry Christmassy story, and it's set in the same world as Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And then on October 29th is the Nalo Hopkinson short story collection I mentioned earlier, which is Jamaica Ginger and Other Concoctions, from Tachyon Publications. I think this will include both fantasy and science fiction stories. Very exciting. And then I don't have anything at all for November, so if you have any exciting November releases on your radar, please let me know in the comments. And then I have one book for December that I am tentatively curious about. This is The Peculiar Garden of Harriet Hunt by Chelsea Iverson. This is coming on December 3rd from Sourcebooks Landmark. This is another one where the book description just doesn't do a good enough job telling me what this book is genre-wise. It's absolutely fantasy. It's got magic plants in it. It's about a woman named Harriet Hunt who marries for safety and security, but I guess that doesn't work out for her because the husband is pretty bad, and she grows magical plants This is comped in the book description to The Magician's Daughter, previously mentioned, and Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, both of which I really liked, both of which were historical fantasy. So I am assuming this is historical fantasy, but time and place are not mentioned. So I really don't know. I wish I knew. And that's it. That's the end of my anticipated releases list for the second half of 2024. Let me know if you found new books on this list you're excited about. Let me know if I missed anything you think should be on my radar. Anyhow, I hope you're having a very nice day. That is all. Bye for now.